I'll speak just briefly about our program. The Pacific Data Program is led by SPC and is supported through funding from the New Zealand Government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Our program aims to improve access to timely and reliable data from the Pacific. And our ambition is to provide the most comprehensive range of data and information about the Pacific from the Pacific. This is important to provide that evidence base that's needed to inform better policy developments and decision making, and ultimately to support our members in tackling the complex developments, economic, social, and health and environmental challenges that they face. This program of work builds on the strengths of our organization of SPC in our application of science and knowledge to support the development aspirations of our members, and it builds on our intimate understanding of Pacific context, and also in our relationships and convening power to bring together the right people and partnerships to develop Pacific-centric solutions. This Pacific Data Hub is a natural evolution of SPC's role as custodian and steward of data and information on behalf of our members. And as a responsible data steward, we acknowledge that our role needs to evolve and adapt to current and emerging challenges and trends. The data platforms and the data services that we provide serve as a sustainable data infrastructure for all of our members. And our work is building a shared capability that seeks to exploit the latest advances in technology and in data science, and also in learning from emerging trends in approaches to data governance and data management. We're doing this to ensure that our data resources are well managed and can continue to be made available as a regional public good. So what is open data? I have a definition here from the Open Knowledge Foundation, and it is a widely adopted and accepted definition of what open data is. So it's open data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirement of to attribute and share alike. Open data is still relatively young. It has its roots in open source, the open source approach to developing software and releasing software, but it has linkages now to other open initiatives and to, of course, open governments. But open data itself, I think the first references to it in literature go back 30 years, but in practice, open data, we're starting to see open data platforms only really in the last sort of 15 years. So I wanted to touch on some of the characteristics of open data, just to give some meaning and some real context, tangible context to what open data actually means. Open data, by design, should not contain any personal information or information that can be used to identify specific individuals. This is an important characteristic for setting the scene whenever we introduce open data. For many who are not familiar with open data, their first reaction is concern over privacy and protecting sensitive data, and often about ownership and fear of losing control. So we like to put that up front straight away. It's that open data by design is not, does not contain personal identifiable information. It's also easily discoverable and accessible. This means that it has a sufficient level of metadata to inform the user of the information about the data itself, and also enables the data to be found easily through things like catalogs, data catalogs and search engines. And it also enhances the interoperability, the ability to exchange data between different platforms. This leads to the next characteristic in that it can be expressed easily in machine-readable or non-proprietary formats or open formats. For example, a CSV file instead of an Excel file or a PDF document. And this helps with, of course, interoperability and also adds to the discoverability and accessibility of the actual data contained within these formats. Another important characteristic is that it should be able to be reused and remixed with other data and information. This, together with the following, with the next bullet point about not having restrictions on reuse apart from attribution, these are around the licensing conditions under which data is released for reuse. So open data generally has very open licensing terms where users are allowed to reuse data and information without restriction. And at most, the restriction is, or the condition on reuse is that the data be attributed back to the owner or the source. Applying licensing or appropriate licensing to data is actually quite important in the context of open data. It provides the legal certainty for potential users of data about how they can use, access and reuse that data and information. In the absence of open data licensing, there's ambiguity there, which can be a barrier for some organizations and some potential users of data for reusing that data to create new data products, for example. The last point I have there is not unique to open data itself, but I think it's an important one to mention as part of our open data conversation. That data in general increases in value the more that it is used and reused. Now, I wanted to show some examples of what open data and I've got a spelling mistake there, non-open data looks like. And I've got a few examples here of data sets from the Pacific Data Catalog. So I'm going to try and switch between my PowerPoint slide and my browser. So forgive me if things do not work. I'm rolling the dice here with the demo gods. And I've messed up already because I shared the wrong screen. Let me reshare my browser window so we can look at some examples of what open data and non-open data look like. All right, I hope you can all see my my screen now, my browser. The first example we've got here are the Pacific headline SDG indicators. This is a data set that's curated by our Statistics for Development division. If we look at some of the attributes and the characteristics of this data set in our catalog, we see that the data set contains two resources, but a CSV file and a PDF file. If we look further down, it has rich metadata telling us about the dates and the source, where it was a source from, and also some licensing information. It's indicating here that it is using an open license. So this example is an example of an open data set. If we look at the data files themselves, the resource file, we can see why this is an open format, because it's, we can see the example here of an open format that's also machine readable. And this is extremely important for interoperability, but also being able to automatically process files and do analysis on the data and information. By being machine readable, it allows different entry points or access points to the data. So as a normal user, you can interact with the data through your browser, through the user interface like we're doing now. But you also have options to do an automatic download, or to embed the data set in other platforms, or to use the programmatic access interface, the API, to automate the processing of and analysis of that data set. Another example we have is the COVID vaccination data. And this is a data set that is collected by our public health division, and it's being, or it is being curated by our statistics division in the Pacific Data Hub platform. This again is similar to the previous data set, where we've got a couple of resources, one a PDF file, but also it has a CSV file, which is in open data format. It has a good level of metadata, providing some information about the data set itself to enhance discoverability in search. And it also has an open license. The next example, demographic and health survey data. This is from, again, from our Statistics for Development division. We see here the file formats available, PDF and Excel. Excel is not, it's a proprietary format from Microsoft, so it's not seen as an open data format, although it is machine readable. But this would be an example of non-open data because it's using proprietary format, and also it does not have a license applied. So without that license there, you're creating, well, there's ambiguity for potential users and what they're allowed to do with the data set, and that may be a barrier for reuse. So this example here, although it has a good level of metadata, it has some file formats that are machine readable. The reason why it's not open is because it does not have that open data license. The next example here is an example of disaggregated and summarized statistics from the Pacific NSOs. And the example I've taken here is a pocket summary data set from the Statistics Office. Again, open file format here with CSV. It has open data license. It has metadata describing the source and dates and versions. I wanted to drill into the actual data set itself. So the first characteristic we touched on was the that the open data does not contain, or should not contain, any personal identifiable information. So this is all disaggregated data that has been put together by our statistics division with the NSO, with the National Statistics Officers from our member countries. So if you examine the values in the tables here, that there should be no information that can be used to identify individuals that participated in the survey. Right, I'll move on to the next slide. Barriers, well, I'll speak to barriers for releasing open data in the Pacific. What slide is, should be coming back, there it is. So I've picked 3 barriers here, and this is by no means a comprehensive view of barriers and challenges to releasing open data, and it's not even based on well, necessarily based on any literature or research in this area. It is, however, based on our practical experience in implementing open data platforms and implementing data exchange and data sharing between different organizations. And these three points actually do echo some of the findings you will come across in literature and research on barriers to releasing open data in the Pacific context. The first one is about maturity, both in data governance and data management. We see that often see that the necessary governance frameworks and policies and practices to support open data just do not exist or are not at a sufficient level. For example, statistical legal frameworks in many of our countries or member countries were developed in the pre-digital era and are not well suited to complex and the new and complex and dynamic ways in which data and information can be exchanged and exploited. We also see that because of low levels of maturity in data management practice, this has perpetuated the proliferation of data silos and exacerbates that problem of access to data, providing data in formats that are open and accessible, and also providing platforms that have the open interfaces which enable automatic, easy access through search and user-friendly interfaces, but also programmatic access so that data sets are readable, machine readable, and can be analyzed at a deeper level. Technical capacity and capability is also an issue for releasing open data in Pacific, and I guess this is not unique to data or open data. This is a common thread across development in general. Often our members do not have the ability to maintain a robust and reliable data infrastructure that can ensure the integrity and ongoing protection and preservation of data. There's also challenges around the development and retaining of technical staff to maintain these systems. I think importantly, there's the one that keeps coming up for us in our conversations with different stakeholder groups is the level of data literacy, particularly within government agencies who want to or have aspirations to be more data driven and to derive more value from data that's available to them. There needs to be an increased focus on raising that level of data literacy to give or to empower users to interact with and use data with confidence. The third one here is about attitudes towards sharing of data. Quite often we encounter resistance to sharing because people have a fear of losing control or influence. There's also a fear of disclosure, people not wanting to see what's behind the data and information, fear of negatively impacting political campaigns, for example. And also, there's a prevalence of lack of trust in official sources of information. This is quite a new one. It's that's not unique to the Pacific. We also see this in the proliferation of misinformation that's spread across social media channels. So this one in particular is quite a challenging one for us to address. And in some cases, we've seen in the Pacific responses to a lack of trust in official sources of information, or responses to trying to block unofficial sources of information can also have a negative impact on trust in government institutions. The first two barriers here can be partly addressed through better coordination, fostering partnerships and collaboration. The third one, I think, is the bigger challenge because it can't necessarily be fixed by throwing more resources and more money at the problem. It requires new thinking to our approach to data stewardship. And as Julia touched on earlier, perhaps leaning into our shared values, our shared Pacific values and the Pacific way to help shift those attitudes and change behaviors around the stewardship and custodianship of data, and integrating these into our approach, our approaches for data management and data governance.